Lucas Caldwell had spent the better part of 2 months planning the perfect anniversary trip for Hannah. 10 years of marriage deserved something special, and he wanted to remind her of the passion they'd once had. He booked a secluded mountain cabin, something private, intimate. A place where they could reconnect without distractions. The reservations were set, the itinerary planned to the last detail. A private chef for their first night. A scenic boat ride on the lake. A carefully chosen bottle of wine from the year they met. Everything had to be perfect. He smiled as he sat in his home office, scrolling through confirmation emails on his laptop. Then his phone buzzed. A notification from Hannah. "I can't wait to finally be free. Just a few more days." Lucas frowned. His heart knocked against his ribs. His first thought was that it must be a mistake. Maybe she was talking about work. She had been stressed lately, complaining about deadlines and office politics. But something about the wording made his stomach twist. His hands felt heavy as he clicked on the message thread. The reply came almost instantly. "I know. It's been hard waiting, but it'll be worth it." Lucas's breath caught in his throat. The number wasn't saved in her contacts. Just a string of digits. Anonymous. Secret. He stared at the screen, his pulse pounding in his ears. There was no work-related stress. No innocent explanation. Hannah was planning something behind his back. And worse, she was planning to leave him. For a long moment, Lucas sat frozen, his mind a storm of emotions. Anger, confusion, disbelief. A part of him wanted to storm into the living room and demand an explanation right then and there. But another part, one he barely recognized, kept him still. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to think. If she was really planning to leave him, there had to be more. And if there was more, he needed proof. His grip tightened around his phone. Not yet. The next few days were unbearable. Lucas played his role perfectly, smiling, kissing Hannah on the cheek, pretending nothing had changed. Meanwhile, he combed through every trace of her digital footprint. She had been careful. No obvious emails. No calls under suspicious names. But the texts, they continued. "I can't wait to see you. We'll be together soon. It's all falling into place." Lucas copied every message. Each night, as Hannah slept beside him, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He had spent 10 years loving this woman, building a life with her. And now, in the span of a few stolen texts, it had all unraveled. But why? What had changed? Then, an idea formed. A dark, vindictive idea. He would take her on the trip. Act as if nothing were wrong. And over the course of that weekend, he would gather everything he needed. He would be the perfect, doting husband. And when the time was right, he would destroy her. The morning of their trip, Lucas kissed Hannah softly on the forehead. "Happy anniversary," he murmured. She smiled, though there was something guarded in her expression. "Happy anniversary," she echoed. They packed the car, and Lucas felt a strange sort of calm settle over him. He had always been a man who valued control, over his emotions, over his life. And now, for the first time in days, he had it back. As they pulled out of the driveway, Hannah gazed out the window, lost in thought. "This was really sweet of you, Lucas. I wasn't expecting a trip like this." Lucas smiled. "I wanted to surprise you." "Oh, you did," she said softly. She had no idea just how much. The drive stretched on, winding through dense forests and rolling hills. The cabin was a few hours from the city, far enough to feel isolated, but close enough that Lucas had phone service. He had planned it that way. "Did you tell anyone where we were going?" Hannah asked casually as they neared their destination. Lucas glanced at her. The way she asked it, too offhand, too rehearsed, made something click in his brain. She wasn't just waiting to leave him. She was making sure no one would be looking for them. Lucas kept his face neutral. "Nope. Thought it would be more fun if it was just us." Hannah nodded slowly. "Yeah. That's nice." She shifted in her seat, staring out the window again. Her fingers tapped restlessly against her thigh. Lucas clenched the steering wheel. You're nervous, aren't you? Good. They arrived at the cabin just before sunset. It was beautiful, secluded, nestled between towering pines, with a lake stretching out in the distance. Lucas carried their bags inside, watching Hannah carefully. She moved through the space like someone casing a scene. She took in the exits, the layout. Lucas wondered what she was looking for. Do you like it? He asked, stepping behind her. Hannah startled slightly, but quickly masked it with a smile. Yeah, it's perfect. Perfect for what? He wanted to ask. Instead, he walked to the kitchen and pulled out the bottle of wine he had brought. Let's celebrate, he said, pouring 2 glasses. Hannah hesitated, then took the glass. To us, she said. Lucas clinked his glass against hers. To us. As they drank, he studied her carefully. She thought she was playing him. That she had him wrapped around her finger, unsuspecting. She had no idea. The game had just begun. The wine was rich and smooth, but Lucas barely tasted it. His focus remained on Hannah, who took slow sips, her expression unreadable. He had spent years studying this woman, learning her every habit, every subtle shift in her moods. And tonight something was off. She was too careful. Too measured. 10 years, Lucas mused, swirling the wine in his glass. That's a long time, isn't it? Hannah glanced at him, then forced a smile. It is. You ever think about where we'll be in 10 more? He asked, watching her reaction. She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Of course, she said quickly. I mean, I hope we'll be happy. Maybe take more trips like this. Lucas nodded, suppressing a smirk. You're lying. He played along, making small talk as they finished their wine. Then he stood, stretching. I'm going to get some firewood from outside, he said. Why don't you relax? Hannah's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. Want me to come with you? Lucas raised an eyebrow. She was nervous. Why? Nah, he said easily. I got it. She nodded, but her shoulders remained tense. Lucas stepped outside into the cool night air, inhaling deeply. He needed a moment alone, to think, to strategize. The cabin sat on a small clearing near the lake, surrounded by towering trees. The nearest town was miles away. If Hannah was planning something, this was the perfect place for it. As Lucas gathered wood from the pile near the cabin, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, half expecting another message from Hannah's mysterious lover. Instead, it was Mia, his best friend and business partner. Mia, hey, just checking in. You guys settle in okay? Lucas hesitated, then typed back. Lucas, yeah? Everything's good. A moment later, Mia replied. Mia, you sure? You seemed off before you left. Lucas exhaled slowly. Mia knew him too well. He considered telling her everything, about the texts, about Hannah's strange behavior. But he wasn't ready. Not yet. Lucas, I'm fine. Just needed this trip. Mia didn't press further, but something about her timing nagged at him. Mia had always been protective of him, especially when it came to Hannah. Had she noticed something Lucas had missed? Shaking the thought away, he pocketed his phone and returned to the cabin. Inside, Hannah sat curled up on the couch, staring into the fire. She looked peaceful, but her knee bounced slightly, a nervous tic she had when she was anxious. Lucas set the firewood down and sat beside her. You okay? Hannah startled slightly, then forced another smile. Yeah, just thinking. About what? She hesitated. Us. Lucas tilted his head. And? Hannah sighed, sipping the last of her wine. I don't know. It just feels different, doesn't it? Lucas studied her carefully. What feels different? She shrugged. Us. Life. Everything. Lucas nodded slowly. Guess that's what happens after 10 years. Things change. Yeah, she murmured. They do. For a moment, the only sound was the crackling fire. Lucas wanted to push further, to force her to confess right then and there. But he wasn't ready to reveal his hand. Not yet. Instead, he leaned in and kissed her. Hannah tensed, just for a second, before kissing him back. It was soft, hesitant. Wrong. When they pulled apart, Lucas gave her a small smile. I love you, you know. Hannah swallowed hard. I love you too. Another lie. That night, Lucas lay awake in bed, listening to the wind whistle through the trees. Hannah slept beside him, her breath slow and steady. But he knew she wasn't at peace. At some point she stirred, slipping out of bed as quietly as possible. Lucas kept his breathing even, pretending to be asleep. He listened as she padded across the wooden floor and into the next room. A faint glow illuminated the doorway, her phone screen. Slowly, Lucas turned his head just enough to watch her. She was texting someone. His jaw clenched. He had already read the previous messages. He knew she was planning something. But seeing it in real time made his blood boil. Who was she talking to? What was she saying? As quietly as possible, Lucas slipped out of bed and moved toward the doorway. Hannah was too focused on her phone to notice. Everything's in place. He doesn't suspect a thing. Lucas's fingers curled into fists. For a moment, he considered confronting her right then and there. Demanding answers. Exposing her betrayal. But then she sent one last message before slipping back into bed. I'll see you soon, Eli. Eli. Lucas's mind raced. He didn't know anyone named Eli. Hannah had never mentioned that name before. Who the hell was he? And more importantly, how long had Hannah been waiting to betray him? The next morning, Lucas acted as if nothing had changed. He made breakfast, kissed Hannah on the cheek, and even suggested a hike through the nearby trails. She smiled at him, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. That sounds nice. Great, Lucas said. They packed their bags and headed into the woods. The trees stretched high above them, the scent of pine thick in the air. Birds chirped, and the sound of a distant stream filled the silence between them. Lucas walked beside Hannah, hands in his pockets, pretending to be relaxed. But inside, his mind was spinning. Eli. He needed to find out who he was. And he needed to do it fast. Because something told him that this wasn't just an affair. This was something much, much worse. The forest was alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and birdsong, but Lucas barely heard any of it. His mind was a storm of questions, all circling back to one name. Eli. Who the hell was Eli? He stole a glance at Hannah as they walked. She moved lightly, effortlessly, as if the weight of betrayal wasn't pressing down on her. As if she hadn't spent the night texting another man about leaving him. Lucas clenched his fists in his pockets, forcing his breathing to remain steady. He had to stay in control. Blowing up now would only tip her off. Instead, he played along. This place is beautiful, Lucas said, feigning admiration for the scenery. Good choice, huh? Hannah smiled, but it felt hollow. Yeah. You really outdid yourself? Lucas let out a soft chuckle. Well, 10 years deserves something special. Her smile faltered slightly. Good. He wanted her to feel the weight of it. The significance of a decade together. Did she ever love him, or had this all been a lie? No. He couldn't think like that. Not yet. He needed to keep his focus. Hannah adjusted the strap of her backpack. How far is the trail? Couple of miles, Lucas said. There's a lookout point up ahead. Thought we could sit for a while. Sounds perfect, she said, though there was something distant in her voice. Lucas knew she wasn't thinking about the hike. Her mind was elsewhere, on him. They reached the lookout about 20 minutes later. The view was breathtaking, an expanse of mountains stretching endlessly in every direction. Lucas set down his pack and sat on a nearby rock, motioning for Hannah to join him. For a while, they sat in silence. Lucas wanted to see if she'd say anything. If she'd give herself away. She didn't. Finally, he broke the silence. Hannah, he said, his tone soft. Are you happy? She turned to him, startled. What? With us? Lucas continued, keeping his voice carefully measured. Are you happy? She hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. Of course, she said, offering a small smile. Why would you ask that? Lucas shrugged. I don't know. Just been thinking about the last 10 years. Wondering if you ever wished things were different. Hannah glanced away, staring out at the mountains. I mean, doesn't everyone think about that sometimes? Lucas nodded slowly. Maybe. She exhaled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Marriage is complicated, Lucas. People change. Life changes. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. Lucas studied her carefully. There was truth in her words, but also something else. Guilt? Or regret? Before he could say anything, Hannah stood. We should head back before it gets too late. Lucas nodded and followed, his mind still turning over her words. She was hiding something. And soon, he would find out exactly what. That night, after Hannah fell asleep, Lucas grabbed his phone and stepped outside onto the porch. He needed answers, and he needed them now. The first thing he did was run a search for the number Hannah had been texting. He already knew it wouldn't be listed under a real name, but he tried anyway. No hits. Frustrated but determined, he went deeper. He had contacts, people from work who specialized in cybersecurity. If anyone could find out who Eli really was, it was them. Lucas sent a discreet message to one of his contacts, keeping it vague. Lucas, need a favor. Can you run a reverse lookup on this number? He attached the digits from Hannah's messages and waited. Minutes passed. The wind howled through the trees, sending a shiver down his spine. Lucas leaned against the railing, his jaw tight. Then, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. You shouldn't be looking into this, Lucas. His blood ran cold. He stared at the screen, his pulse hammering in his chest. Who the hell was this? Before he could respond, another message appeared. Unknown number, walk away. This isn't just about your wife. It's bigger than you think. Lucas gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had spent the last few days feeling like he was one step behind, but now he was certain. Hannah's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was part of something much bigger. And now, whoever they were, they knew he was digging. Lucas didn't sleep that night. He stayed awake, listening to Hannah's steady breathing beside him, knowing that the woman he had loved for a decade had been working against him. By morning, he had a response from his contact. Contact, ran the number. It's linked to an encrypted account, but I found something interesting. The phone was purchased under the name Elias Caldwell. Lucas froze. Caldwell. His last name. For a moment, the world around him blurred. Then, as the realization sank in, his stomach twisted violently. Eli wasn't just some random man Hannah had been seeing. Eli was family. The moment Hannah stepped out of the bathroom, Lucas was waiting. She barely had time to react before he held up his phone, the name still glaring on the screen. Who is Elias Caldwell? He asked coldly. Hannah's entire body went rigid. Don't lie to me. His voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Tell me the truth, Hannah. Right now. Her lip trembled. For the first time since this started, she looked truly afraid. Lucas stepped closer. You've been planning this for how long? Weeks? Months? Hannah's breathing grew uneven. Lucas, was this ever real? He demanded. Or was I just a mark? Tears welled in her eyes, but he had no sympathy left. He had spent 10 years believing in them, and now it was all crumbling. Finally, Hannah swallowed hard and whispered. He's your brother, Lucas. Lucas felt the breath leave his lungs. What? Hannah's gaze darted to the floor. Elias. He's your half-brother. Lucas's mind reeled. That's impossible. It's not, Hannah said shakily. And Lucas, this wasn't just about an affair. There's more to it. His hands clenched at his sides. Then start talking. Hannah closed her eyes, as if preparing for the worst. And then, in a single breath, she shattered everything. You were never supposed to know. We were sent to take everything from you. Lucas stood frozen, Hannah's words echoing in his mind like a gunshot. We were sent to take everything from you. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. He had expected lies, manipulation, maybe even a confession about the affair. But this? This was something else entirely. Start talking, he said, his voice dangerously low. Hannah swallowed, her hands trembling at her sides. Lucas, No. He stepped forward, forcing her to look at him. No more stalling. No more lies. You owe me the truth, all of it. Now. She hesitated, then let out a shaky breath. Elias Caldwell. He's your father's son. Your half-brother. Lucas felt the room tilt. His father, Joseph Caldwell, had been a ruthless businessman, a man who built an empire through sheer force of will. But he had also been secretive, keeping much of his past hidden. Lucas had grown up believing he was an only child. Bullshit, he spat. My father never had another kid. Hannah flinched but held her ground. Yes, he did. Eli was born before your mother ever met your father. Your dad abandoned his first family when he became wealthy. He left Eli and his mother with nothing. No money. No name. Just disappeared and started over, with you. Lucas shook his head, rejecting the words even as something deep inside him told him they were true. His father had never spoken much about his past. He had always been distant, cold, and ruthless when it came to business. But to leave a whole family behind? He felt sick. And you? Lucas demanded. What the hell do you have to do with this? Hannah's lower lip quivered. I was part of the plan. Lucas's stomach twisted. The plan? Hannah closed her eyes briefly, then forced herself to continue. Eli spent years searching for the truth about your father. When he finally found out who you really were, he wanted revenge. Not just on Joseph Caldwell, but on you too. He wanted to destroy everything your father left behind. The company, the fortune, the legacy. And the best way to do that was through me. Lucas finished coldly. Hannah let out a quiet sob. I was supposed to get close to you, make you fall in love with me, marry you, and eventually take everything from you. We were supposed to bleed you dry, ruin the Caldwell name, and then disappear. Lucas's whole body felt like it was burning from the inside out. How long? Hannah blinked, confused. How long have you been lying to me? His voice was sharp, cutting. From the beginning? Hannah hesitated. At first, yes. But Lucas... She took a step forward, reaching for him. Somewhere along the way, it changed. I fell in love with you. Lucas recoiled as if she had struck him. You don't get to say that. It's true, she cried. I never meant for it to go this far. But then the years passed and you... She choked back a sob. You weren't the man Eli said you'd be. You weren't like your father. You were good to me. You loved me. And you betrayed me. Lucas interrupted. For 10 years. Every kiss, every I love you, every anniversary, you were pretending. Tears streamed down Hannah's face, but Lucas couldn't find it in himself to care. Lucas, I tried to stop it. She whispered. That's why I've been acting strange. I was trying to find a way out. Lucas let out a bitter laugh. Out? You mean free. That's what you texted him. I can't wait to finally be free. Hannah paled. You saw that? Of course I did. Lucas said through gritted teeth. And tell me, Hannah, was I ever part of the escape plan? She didn't answer. That told him everything. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of it all. So what happens now? He asked. What's the next step in Eli's plan? Were you just going to take the money and run? Leave me wondering what the hell happened. Hannah wiped at her tears. Lucas, I don't know anymore. Eli thinks we're on track, but I haven't told him that I want out. Lucas let out a hollow laugh. Oh, so you expect me to believe you were about to betray him for me? Yes. He stared at her, searching for the truth in her expression. He wanted to believe her. Some pathetic, broken part of him still loved this woman. But he didn't know if that part of him could survive what she had done. Where is he now? Lucas asked. Hannah hesitated. Where is he? She swallowed. Not far. Lucas narrowed his eyes. He's here, isn't he? Hannah didn't answer. Lucas grabbed his phone and pulled up the last message from the unknown number, the warning he had received the night before. Walk away. This isn't just about your wife. It's bigger than you think. Eli had been watching. Rage simmered beneath Lucas's skin. He wasn't just some fool being cheated on. He was a target. And he was done playing the victim. Lucas turned back to Hannah, his expression unreadable. We're leaving. Hannah blinked in surprise. What? We're leaving this cabin right now. No calls. No texts. Nothing. You and I are going to go back home, and you're going to tell me everything. Every detail. Every part of Eli's plan. Hannah hesitated. If we leave, he'll know something's wrong. Good, Lucas said. Let him know. Hannah's eyes filled with fresh panic. Lucas, you don't understand. Eli isn't just angry at your father. He's dangerous. Lucas clenched his jaw. So am I. For 10 years he had been played. Manipulated. Used. That ended now. They packed in silence, the tension between them thick and suffocating. Hannah kept glancing toward the trees, as if expecting someone to emerge. Lucas kept one hand in his pocket, fingers wrapped around the knife he had taken from the kitchen. If Eli was out there, watching, waiting, let him come. Because Lucas was done being the pawn in someone else's game. He was going to finish this. The air inside the car was thick with silence as Lucas drove down the winding road, leaving the secluded cabin behind. Hannah sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her fingers curled in her lap, her breathing uneven. Lucas knew she was afraid. Not just of him, but of what was coming. Good. The past 10 years of his life had been a lie, but he wasn't about to roll over and let Eli, his so-called half-brother, tear apart what little remained. No. He was going to turn this game around. You're awfully quiet, Lucas said, keeping his eyes on the road. Hannah swallowed. What do you want me to say? Lucas tightened his grip on the wheel. How about the truth? No more half-answers, no more manipulation. If you really want out of this, then tell me exactly what Eli's next move is. Hannah hesitated. Lucas slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched against the pavement, sending a shockwave of silence through the car. Hannah gasped, clutching the dashboard. Talk, Lucas ordered, his voice like steel. Hannah's breathing was ragged as she turned to him. Eli is watching us, she whispered. He's always watching. Lucas exhaled through his nose. Then give him something to see. Hannah looked at him, confused. We're going home. Lucas continued. I'm going to act like I know nothing. You're going to pretend everything is going according to plan. You're going to tell him that you're still in this. That we're right where he wants us. Hannah shook her head. No. If he suspects anything, he won't hesitate. He'll make his move. Lucas met her gaze. Exactly. Realization dawned in her eyes. You're setting a trap, she whispered. Lucas's jaw clenched. I'm done playing their game, Hannah. It's time to end this. The drive home was long and tense. Lucas watched the rearview mirror constantly, expecting a black SUV to appear out of nowhere, headlights glowing like the eyes of a predator. But no one followed. Not yet. When they finally reached their house, everything looked the same. The lawn was still neatly trimmed. The windows were dark. The world hadn't shifted, even though Lucas's entire reality had. As they stepped inside, Lucas turned to Hannah. Make the call. Hannah flinched. Lucas. Now. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and dialed. The line rang once. Twice. Then a voice answered. Lucas couldn't hear what was said, but he saw the way Hannah stiffened. She glanced at him before speaking. It's done, she said softly. He doesn't suspect a thing. A pause. Then a muffled response. Hannah swallowed. Tomorrow night. He'll be vulnerable. It'll be the perfect time. Lucas's blood ran cold. So that was it. Tomorrow night was when Eli planned to strike. Hannah hung up and stared at the phone as if it were a snake about to bite. He bought it, she murmured. Lucas nodded. Good. Now, he just had to be ready when the time came. That night, Lucas barely slept. He lay awake, listening to every creak in the house, his mind playing out every possible scenario. At some point, Hannah stirred beside him. Lucas? She whispered. He didn't answer. She shifted closer. I meant what I said. I never expected to love you. But I did. Lucas turned his head slightly, staring up at the ceiling. That doesn't change what you did. A silence stretched between them before Hannah spoke again. What if we ran? She whispered. What if we just disappeared? We don't have to play this game. We could leave everything behind. Lucas let out a bitter laugh. You think Eli would let us go? After 10 years of planning? Hannah didn't answer. Lucas turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. You still don't get it, do you? Hannah frowned. Get what? I'm not running, Lucas said. I'm finishing this. She inhaled sharply but didn't argue. The next day passed in a blur. Lucas went through the motions, pretending everything was normal. He went to work, answered emails, even called Mia to keep up the illusion that nothing was wrong. But inside, he was preparing for war. When night fell, the pieces began to fall into place. Hannah sat at the kitchen table, her hands gripping a mug of tea she hadn't touched. He's coming, she whispered. Lucas nodded, adjusting the hidden security cameras he had installed earlier that day. Let him. At exactly 11:45 p.m., the doorbell rang. Hannah stiffened. Lucas! Go to the bedroom, he ordered. Lock the door. No matter what happens, don't come out. Her eyes flickered with something, fear, guilt, regret, but she obeyed, disappearing down the hall. Lucas exhaled slowly, centering himself. Then he walked to the front door and opened it. A man stood on the porch. He looked like Lucas. Not exactly, but close enough that the resemblance was undeniable. The same sharp jawline, the same piercing blue eyes. Eli Caldwell. Lucas studied him, his stomach twisting with something unfamiliar. This was his brother. A brother he had never known existed. A brother who had spent years plotting against him. Eli smirked. Well, this is a bit surreal, isn't it? Lucas crossed his arms. You could say that. Eli tilted his head. No anger? No dramatic threats? Lucas exhaled through his nose. What do you want, Eli? Eli chuckled. Come on, brother. You already know the answer to that. Lucas didn't react. He just watched. Waited. Eli took a slow step forward. You have everything that should have been mine. The name. The fortune. The life. Our father took it from me and handed it to you. His eyes darkened. I think it's time I take it back. Lucas clenched his jaw. And you thought the best way to do that was through my wife? Eli's smirk widened. What can I say? She played her part well, didn't she? Lucas's fists curled at his sides, but he forced himself to stay calm. Where is she? Eli asked, his voice casual. I assumed she told you everything by now. Did she beg you to forgive her? Lucas didn't answer. Eli took another step forward. You know what comes next, right? Lucas finally spoke. Yeah, he said quietly. I do. Then he smiled. Because behind Eli, flashing blue and red lights flooded the driveway. Eli barely had time to react before armed officers swarmed onto the porch, guns raised. Hands in the air! Lucas watched as Eli's face shifted from confidence to shock to pure rage. Hannah had told him tomorrow night. But Lucas had changed the plan. "You set me up," Eli hissed. Lucas stepped forward, his voice calm. "You spent 10 years planning to take my life from me, Eli." He tilted his head. "Did you really think I wouldn't fight back?" Eli lunged. A shot rang out. And just like that, it was over. The moment the gunshot rang out, time seemed to slow. Eli staggered backward, a pained grunt escaping his lips as his legs buckled beneath him. Blood bloomed across his side, soaking through his shirt as he hit the porch with a heavy thud. Lucas didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply watched. Deputies swarmed the porch, their weapons still trained on Eli's crumpled form. "Stay down!" one of them barked. "Do not move!" Eli groaned, clutching his side, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Even now, even wounded, there was something dangerous in his eyes. Lucas crouched beside him. 10 years, he said quietly. 10 years of planning, all leading to this. Eli chuckled weakly, blood staining his teeth. "Guess I should have planned for you being smarter than I thought." Lucas tilted his head. "You spent a decade thinking I was weak. That was your mistake." Eli let out another cough, grimacing as he struggled to breathe. "This isn't over," he rasped. "You think you won?" His eyes gleamed, even through the pain. "You don't know the full story, Lucas. There's more, so much more." Lucas frowned. "More?" Before he could ask, the officers hauled Eli to his feet, slapping cuffs onto his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," one of them began, but Eli barely seemed to be listening. Instead, he looked at Lucas, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "Enjoy what's left of your father's legacy, brother." Then they dragged him away. Lucas stood there, frozen, as Eli's words echoed in his mind. What the hell did he mean? Hannah was still locked in the bedroom when Lucas finally stepped inside the house. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands gripping the sheets so tightly her knuckles were white. When she saw Lucas, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and something else, relief. "Is it over?" she whispered. Lucas shut the door behind him, leaning against it. "Eli's in custody." Hannah exhaled sharply, sagging forward. "Thank God." Lucas didn't move. He just stared at her. Hannah felt his gaze and looked up, her expression shifting. "Lucas, you knew," he said quietly. She swallowed. "Knew what?" "That there was more to this." Hannah hesitated. That was all the confirmation Lucas needed. He crossed the room, standing over her. "What aren't you telling me?" "Lucas, please." "No." His voice was sharp. "You don't get to beg. Not after everything." Hannah flinched. "I don't know everything," she admitted. "Eli never told me all of his plans. I was just supposed to get close to you, to gain your trust, and when the time was right, we'd take control of your inheritance. Of your father's company." Lucas clenched his jaw. "That's it." Hannah hesitated again. "Don't lie to me, Hannah." She exhaled shakily. I think Eli had help. Someone on the inside. Someone with power." Lucas's stomach twisted. "Who?" "I don't know," Hannah admitted. "But Eli always said we weren't alone in this. That there were other people who wanted the Caldwell family gone." A cold chill ran down Lucas's spine. He had been so focused on Eli, on stopping him, that he hadn't considered the bigger picture. What if this wasn't over? What if Eli was just the beginning? The next day, Lucas met with Mia at his office. The tension between them was thick, unspoken questions hanging in the air. "I did some digging," Mia said, dropping a thick file onto the desk. "You're not going to like what I found." Lucas opened the folder, scanning the contents. Bank records. Offshore accounts. Mysterious transactions linked to Caldwell Industries. "What am I looking at?" Lucas asked, his voice low. Mia leaned forward. "Evidence that someone inside your father's company has been siphoning money for years." Lucas's eyes darkened. His father had built Caldwell Industries from nothing. It was supposed to be his legacy. Lucas's legacy. And yet someone had been bleeding it dry from the inside. You think this is connected to Eli? He asked. Mia nodded. I'd bet my life on it. Lucas exhaled slowly. His entire world had already been turned upside down. But now, it seemed, the real fight was only just beginning. Eli had alluded to something bigger. To more players in the game. And if there was one thing Lucas knew for sure, it wasn't over. Not yet. That evening, Lucas sat alone in his office, staring at his reflection in the window. His life had been a lie. His marriage, his past, even his family name, it had all been manipulated, twisted into something unrecognizable. But now he knew the truth. Lucas Caldwell wasn't just a betrayed husband. He was a target. And whoever had set this in motion had just made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated him. And Lucas was about to show them just how big of a mistake that was. Lucas sat at his desk, fingers steepled under his chin, staring at the documents Mia had uncovered. Offshore accounts. Hidden transactions. Someone inside Caldwell Industries had been funneling money for years. And Eli had been working with them. Lucas clenched his jaw. His father, for all his faults, had built that company from the ground up. He had spent his entire life molding Lucas into his successor. Yet someone had been tearing it down from the inside, long before Eli had even resurfaced. The betrayal went deeper than he thought. Eli wasn't the mastermind. He was just a tool. And now, Lucas needed to find out who was holding the hammer. Mia paced beside him, arms crossed. I traced these transactions back as far as I could. They've been moving money for nearly 8 years, long before Eli found you. Lucas exhaled. So Eli was just a pawn. Looks that way, Mia muttered. But a willing one. And if we're right, whoever's behind this didn't just want your father's money. She turned to him, her gaze sharp. They wanted you out of the picture. Lucas scoffed. They almost succeeded. Mia didn't argue. Lucas tapped his fingers against the desk. All right. We need to figure out who had the most to gain from gutting Caldwell Industries. I already have a short list, Mia said, pulling out another document. It's not long. Only a few people had the kind of access to pull this off. Lucas scanned the names. Nathan Pierce, CFO of Caldwell Industries. Richard Vaughn, longtime board member and investor. Eleanor Caldwell. Lucas's breath caught. Eleanor Caldwell. His mother. No, Lucas said, shaking his head. Not her. Mia hesitated. Lucas. No. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. She wouldn't do this. Mia exhaled. Look, I get it. But she's had control over parts of the company since your father passed. And she's the only one who knew about Eli before you did. Lucas froze. What? Mia handed him another document. I dug deeper. She knew about Eli years ago. Before he ever came after you. Before Hannah. She kept it from you. Lucas stared at the paper, his chest tightening. His mother, his own mother, had known about Eli all along? And said nothing? Why? Lucas whispered. Mia shook her head. I don't know. But I do know one thing. She met his gaze. She's been lying to you. Lucas drove to his mother's estate in silence. It was a familiar drive, one he had made countless times growing up. But tonight, the air felt heavier. The house, once a symbol of wealth and security, now loomed like a monument to deception. His mother answered the door herself. She was still regal, still effortlessly composed, even in her silk robe and pearls. Lucas, she said, tilting her head. What a surprise. Lucas stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. We need to talk. Eleanor gave him a knowing smile. This is about Eli, isn't it? Lucas stiffened. You knew. Eleanor sighed, walking toward the fireplace. She poured herself a glass of wine, then looked at him over the rim. Of course I knew. Rage boiled under Lucas's skin. You knew I had a brother, and you kept it from me? She sipped her wine. It wasn't relevant. Lucas barked out a bitter laugh. Not relevant? He spent the last 10 years trying to destroy me. Eleanor didn't flinch. And yet you survived. Lucas's stomach twisted. He had come for answers, but now, standing in front of her, he saw it clearly. His mother was not surprised. Not shaken. Because she had known everything. You were part of this, Lucas whispered. Eleanor set her glass down. Lucas! You were part of it, he repeated, voice raw. The missing money. The betrayals. The attack. It was all you. Eleanor exhaled, then turned fully to face him. For the first time in his life, Lucas saw her for what she truly was. A woman who didn't flinch in the face of cruelty. Because she thrived in it. You think this company belongs to you, she said smoothly. That your father built it for you. But he didn't. Lucas swallowed hard. What are you saying? Eleanor smiled. Your father built it for himself. I built it for you. Lucas's head spun. You've been stealing from the company for years. Eleanor sighed. Not stealing. Reallocating. I was securing our future, Lucas. Our? Lucas's voice was sharp. You mean yours. Eleanor stepped closer, her eyes piercing. You're too soft, Lucas. Too sentimental. If I left this company in your hands, you would have driven it into the ground. You're not ruthless enough. Lucas clenched his fists. So what? You used Eli to wipe me out? You brought in my own wife to betray me? She arched an eyebrow. I never approved of Hannah. That was Eli's mistake. He let emotions cloud his judgment. Lucas's chest heaved. You were willing to let me die. Eleanor sighed, as if the conversation bored her. I was willing to let you be tested. Lucas let out a bitter laugh. Tested? Eleanor smiled. And look. You passed. Lucas walked out of his mother's house in a daze. Mia was waiting in his car, watching him carefully. How bad was it? Lucas swallowed the lump in his throat. Worse than I thought. Mia didn't press for details. Instead, she handed him an envelope. You need to see this. Lucas opened it, his heart slamming against his ribs. Inside were signed documents. Documents proving that Eleanor Caldwell had been funneling money to an offshore account under Eli's name. Proof that she had funded the entire operation. Proof that his mother had been behind this from the start. Lucas exhaled, a slow, controlled breath. She thinks she won. Mia studied him. What are you going to do? Lucas closed the envelope, his jaw tightening. She wanted me to be ruthless, he muttered. Guess it's time I showed her exactly what that looks like. Mia nodded, understanding. Then let's end this. Lucas stared out the window, his mind already forming the plan. The war wasn't over. But by the time he was done, it would be. Lucas had spent his entire life believing that Caldwell Industries was his inheritance. That his father had built it for him. That one day, he would continue the legacy. But that was before. Before Eli. Before Hannah. Before his own mother had betrayed him. Now it was war. Lucas stood in his office, staring at the city skyline, his hands resting on the edge of his desk. His mother's words still echoed in his mind. I was securing our future. You're too soft. You passed. He exhaled slowly. She thought she had won. That she had outplayed him. She had no idea what was coming. Mia sat across from him, phone in hand. Everything's in place, she said. Once we pull the trigger, there's no turning back. Lucas turned, his eyes cold and resolute. Then let's do it. Mia nodded and hit send. Within seconds, the world as Eleanor Caldwell knew it began to crumble. The first move was the financial strike. Lucas had spent the past 48 hours working with a team of forensic accountants, tracing every stolen dollar Eleanor had funneled out of Caldwell Industries. Now, The SEC had those records. The Department of Justice had them too. At exactly 9 a.m., an official investigation into Eleanor Caldwell's financial crimes went public. The stock price of Caldwell Industries plummeted. The media erupted. Every major news outlet plastered her face across the screen. Within an hour, the board of directors held an emergency meeting. By noon, Eleanor Caldwell was ousted from her own company. The second move was legal. Lucas had compiled every piece of evidence Mia had uncovered. The stolen money. The connection to Eli. The offshore accounts. By 3 p.m., federal agents stormed Eleanor's estate. She was arrested on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. The woman who had spent decades controlling everything, who had orchestrated the destruction of her own son, was now being led away in handcuffs. As the cameras flashed, as the reporters shouted questions, Eleanor remained silent. But just before she was shoved into the black SUV, she turned toward the crowd and smiled. Not a look of regret. Not a look of fear. A look of pure amusement. As if she had expected all of this. As if she still had a card left to play. Lucas watched it all unfold from his office, his jaw tight. Mia sat beside him, staring at the screen. She's too calm. Lucas exhaled. She always is. Mia leaned forward. Do you think she planned for this? Lucas didn't answer. Because deep down, he knew the truth. Eleanor Caldwell never lost. Not completely. But today? Today, he had won. The final move was personal. That night, Lucas returned home. The house felt emptier than before. Hannah was gone. She had left a note. No long explanation. No apologies. Just 6 words. I meant it when I loved you. Lucas stared at the paper for a long time. Then he threw it into the fire. Days passed. Then weeks. The world moved on. Caldwell Industries survived the scandal, barely. The damage Eleanor had done would take years to fix. Eli was still in federal custody, facing multiple charges. He would never see the outside of a prison cell again. And Eleanor? She was waiting for trial. No bail. No lawyers willing to take her case. But Lucas knew the truth. She wasn't afraid. Because she had already planned her next move. Lucas stood on the balcony of his penthouse, staring at the city below. Everything had changed. He had survived the betrayal. He had taken back his life. But something inside him felt different. For 10 years he had believed in love. In trust. Now he knew better. Mia joined him, handing him a glass of whiskey. You okay? Lucas took a sip, his gaze unreadable. I will be. Mia studied him for a moment. What now? Lucas smirked faintly. Now? He turned to her, eyes dark and knowing. Now I rebuild.